And a hearty welcome to one and all. Welcome to episode 84, part 1, of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday afternoon into early evening with me and my lovely co-host today, Jen, back for the second time. Some of you think that she's back for the fourth time, but it's like a game show. We record all 5 shows in one day. All of those times she appeared were recorded on the same day, and we're going to have a lot of really cool material for you once again today. If you're checking out episode 84 on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you're checking out this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, click like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. All right, so since it's been a while, I'm going to ask Jen to introduce herself again and give us a little background. And also, I should point out that she has told me off the air that the first part of her 2024, it's been a good start to the year. So introduce yourself, and if you could tell us a little bit about why, the first 2 months or 1.5 months or whatever it is of the year have been good.
Okay, where do I begin?
Wherever you want.
Health-wise, things have been very good, regardless to what's going on with everybody getting sick and viruses.
Oh, absolutely.
And out for the count,
Right, and I can say that I have been around a lot, and I don't mean this, I'm not trying to be funny. I've been around a lot of really sick people. I don't mean like a
mentally.
Joke. Right, but I've been around people who have been sick, and I had to have been exposed.
Yeah.
In my case, I always get, going back 20 years, I always got the flu shot. I don't, again, no judgment. If you get it, don't get it. COVID boost, I don't care. But I just know that I should have gotten sick multiple times just since December, and I have managed to, ducking and dodging, I guess.
Bob and weave.
Right. But you also, you as somebody who teaches classes, Jen is around more people in general than me, so it's actually a lot more impressive if she can avoid getting sick.
And healthcare.
And working in healthcare. So anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. Last year, I was sick basically the entire winter. COVID twice, sick for months in between. I was probably not well or myself for a good 4 or 5 months. So this year, even, if I have a couple days where I'm tired, I'm under the weather, I rest, I knock on wood. We're already in February. So fitness-wise, I've been able to get back on track. I'm getting my lifts in. I take a class here and there somewhere else. I did the float last night.
Oh, that's right.
For the first time, so we'll get to that. And I think at some point we'll chit-chat about that.
Oh, absolutely.
I can't complain right now. Things have been pretty good.
Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
I as I say, I've been very lucky. I have not been, I haven't had to miss any workouts due to injury. It's something that I've gotten into on other episodes. As more so in this instance, not to be sexist in the other way, more so with guys, especially when you get into your 30s, into your 40s, and heaven forbid, the big 5-0. It is so much easier to incur not just minor injuries, but serious injuries. You have a little bit of an issue with your elbow, fuck it, I'm doing 300. Don't do that.
It becomes a whole thing.
And it's so obvious to say, sitting here not injured and feeling about as good as I can possibly feel, and you feeling healthy.
Yes.
To imagine people like us who are regular people. Now, in your case, she has competed on the national stage. If you didn't see when she was on last, this is very serious. She's not just a hot woman who works out. But she has. Thank you. But she has competed at the highest level of amateur bikini, in the fitness realm. So she knows what it's about to stay in shape and to be able to show up for your workouts because you did not cripple yourself in the gym. So the issue to me, and what I'm always wary of, is I know people, and this is not a criticism of them, this is a 1 + 1 = 2, who are successful professionals, whether doctors, whether lawyers, whether financial analysts, whether accountants, who have needed to have emergency surgeries because they hurt themselves at the gym. And that to me is where it doesn't mean we're not trying to achieve. It doesn't mean we don't have goals, but there are levels I'm no longer willing to go.
Right.
Because I'm not 23 yanking 400 pounds in terrible form of deadlifts, and I don't give a fuck. If it feels like my spinal column shifted, fuck that, I'm doing another 2 reps. No.
Ego lifting.
Exactly. There's always going to be some of that, but I would rather, like I did a set earlier today where I did 110 reps with 195 pounds of deadlifts. Now that is crazy, but it's unlikely that I'm going to get hurt with a weight that is so much lighter than what I can comfortably handle. And the theory is if you could do that many reps, the weight isn't heavy enough to hurt you because you're probably warmed up and your muscles, your tendons and ligaments are ready to do it. Now, I mentioned surgery. Oh, and one other thing. Do you have any current plans to compete again, or do you have any?
So I would like to do it again. I'm perimenopausal, so my hormones are kind of all over the place. I think once that settles down a little bit more, it's easier to manage a prep, because for anybody that's done it or is very familiar with it because they're around it a lot in the gym or friends or whatever, you know that if your hormones are all over the place, like you just can't, you're fighting a losing battle.
Right.
You're fighting your body. So it's just not, I started peptides, so I'm trying to just get myself as strong and healthy as possible. And then if the time comes, you know what, maybe when I'm 50.
Okay.
It's right around the corner, so.
Yeah. Well, so I was going to make a joke. So you got 11 years at least to go. You know, there's all kinds of jokes. And no matter what age a woman says, "Oh, happy birthday!" Yeah, you know,
I
next
know,
year
that's
is the
20
big
years
3-0.
down the road, but no,
next
I
year
wish.
is the big 3-0. You know, there's I remember the guy who, unfortunately now notorious. You probably remember him, the Phil Baroni, the former Dorsey. So he was 2 grades behind me and 1 grade behind
me, yeah.
So before anything terrible, and this was a guy who was known as somebody, you know, even though I was older than him, said, don't ever mess with that guy because we don't know what he's doing, but he's a guy who takes everything very seriously.
Yeah.
Don't fuck with him, like don't make jokes. I remember one time playing basketball and he was fine. We were just shooting hoops. But so, hey, you know that guy's like a really good wrestler. I said, okay, you know, I'm not starting a fight with him. It's just a guy. But anyway, so I knew that he was in 10th when I was in 12th, as you were in 11th, if I may say, when I was in 12th. And many years later, in 2004, the UFC really started to gain traction, and Dana White and the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, and it became really exciting because they were having events, whereas with boxing, there would only be 1 or 2 really huge events where fans would get excited. This was even before Floyd Mayweather was really, you know, peaking and having all the pay-per-views. So they would have these pay-per-view events with guys like Chuck Liddell and, you know, and those kind of guys, Georges St. Pierre. And one of the cards had Phil Baroni. And again, I always say my dad was an accountant, so I'm good with math, but this is not really that. So if I'm 30 years old, I'm 30. They introduced him as being 23. And I said, man, I hope it doesn't get back to him. I mean, this guy will take my head off. But I didn't tell anybody, but I'm saying to myself, well, that can't be right. You know, it's like we joke about a woman is really, she's 29, she's not. But I just remember scratching my head. I'm like, well, how could they get the age down? Well, it doesn't matter. It was, nobody said anything, but it's like, no, wait a minute. You can only be within 2 years of me, 3 years if there's some kind of birthday thing.
He wasn't academically gifted and 5 years ahead of his time.
Right. Doogie Howser graduating from medical school at 12, right. But under normal circumstances, if somebody graduates 2 years behind you, they're not going to be 7 years younger than you. Anyway. So one thing I just mentioned was surgery, and I wanted to get into this. Even though we may not look at, both Jen and myself, we have had cosmetic surgery. That was elective surgery, in other words. The surgery I was talking about before is the bad kind, where you had some kind of, you incurred a terrible injury. And I know guys at Bev's, and it's a little bit different. When somebody has a mishap on the leg press, I knew a number of guys that tore their quad. Because sometimes, again, when you're working with so much weight, things can happen, and it's not always a matter of your age. Right. You know, there's that kid that is all over social media named Sam Sulek. I don't know if you've seen any of his stuff. Sure. So he's a nice looking guy. He's got a lot of hair, and he looks like a kid, but he is jacked. He is beyond jacked, and he's kind of funny. He records these videos and he interacts with members in the gym, and he doesn't even go to like fancy gyms. He's at Planet Fitness some of the time, but he's constantly has little injuries. And it's like, these little injuries are going to get more serious. You got to train with better form. You know, you get into these kinds of things. But those are when you see it, you're like, somebody's using 2,100 pounds on the leg press at Bev's. And you know that if the big man, if Mr. Weinberger is there, unless it's someone he knows, he's not going to be okay with it. He says, listen, there's a risk for all of us. Number one, I don't want you to get killed. It makes me look bad, because he would always make a joke like
business.
that. It's bad for me if you get hurt. I don't give a fuck.
And you better re-rack that shit.
Yeah, put the fucking plates away. About 10, 12 years ago,
piss him off.
he was getting ready to throw me out of the gym because one time I forgot to put. I said, Steve, I'm sorry. I applied. He said, Jerry, you know better. I said, I know better. I fucked up. Please. He's like, all right.
He lost his shit one day when somebody didn't. I don't know if they hadn't put their dumbbells back or something, and he's walking around and he's like, did you see? And they were sitting there when I got to wherever it was. I was by the free weights or whatever. And I was like, I have no idea who left that there. And he started screaming. I'm like, it wasn't me, I swear.
Yeah. No, he had those triggers.
Put your shit away. That's just, it's gotta be.
And there are some people. There was an old story about Joe Gold, the guy who ran Gold's Gym a million years ago. And the joke about Joe Gold was, and I think it was actually Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was goofing around, but it's the kind of thing that enough people confirm that it's at least in the ballpark. Is that nobody knew exactly what Joe Gold's hours were.
Oh, God.
He was in the office. He didn't come out that much. So he'd be in the office with the door closed, and nobody knew, is he really there? Is he not there? And they said that anytime, 24/7, from about 1970 into the 1990s, if somebody dropped a weight, anywhere, at any time, at 3 in the morning, Joe Gold would emerge from the office, look to see who did it, and would mutter something about your membership is expiring, and then he would go back to the office.
Beetlejuice.
Yeah, exactly.
He needs to come to my Golds and start screaming at people to re-rack their shit, because they do not.
So right now,
this young generation.
You go to just one gym or two, or what's your?
I teach at Golds in Islip, and I teach at Unique in Holbrook.
Okay, and Unique Fitness in Holbrook. See, there are other gyms that, without me going to, just social media and listening to people. Unique Fitness in Holbrook, I know, is a great gym.
Beautiful.
And ProFit Deer Park is another one that so many people have talked about how great it is, that it's comparable with Bev's in terms of the equipment, the atmosphere, and all that. So that's great. Okay, so two things. Tell us a little bit about your elective surgery experience, and then you had mentioned another thing off the air about some of your people that you knew, whether they were friends, who had like mishaps.
Oh.
Nothing as terrible as the story that I told, which I can briefly get into, but just as far as your ideas, your reasoning for why you wanted surgery, what was going on in your life at the time, was, everything about it.
All right. Well, the first thing that I got done, I think, was my boobs. And that was in 2001. So that's what, everybody got boobs.
Right.
It was one of those things. I was tiny, skinny as a rail. And I was like, the one thing I can't build in the gym or whatever is boobs. And I was like, let's go for it. So I got them, and I remember healing, and I was like, why did I do this to myself? Oh my gosh, I can't even move. Like, you realize when your body is cut into, how you feel every little movement, just getting in and out of bed, going to the ladies' room, things like that.
Did they put you into a big pressure vest for a time, or?
From what I remember, you had to bring a bra that would hook in the. I don't remember if it hooked. There was like criteria that they wanted for the bra that you were going to go home in, and then I believe I might have been bound a little bit initially, and that really was it.
Okay, well that's not. Yeah. That's not so terrible.
Yeah, it wasn't that crazy. But I have several people that I know that went to a very popular doctor on Long Island that I will not say the name, but right. You all know who he is.
Right. And let me also point out that when I did the episode, which was called 90 Hours of Hell, which I'll get into a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to spend 40 minutes describing it, but I did not mention the doctor's name. People who know me know who I'm talking about. He's no longer with us. I don't need to be throwing anything on the guy. It wasn't intentional. So in the initial recording, when I was going through it, just before I posted, I realized at the 32-minute mark, I mentioned his name. Oh my God. So then I just edited that.
Sliced it up.
I apologize to anybody who went through the whole 38 minutes. There's a spot at the 33-minute mark where it feels like there's a cut there.
There's a blip.
Yeah, there's a cut, all right. I cut his name out. Anyway.
We can't do that.
Were you were, because see, that's the thing. I had this terrible experience, but I was not dissatisfied with the end result. I was okay with the end result because the surgery was a success.
Yes.
It was the fact that I almost bled to death was the problem. But he didn't cut muscle. That's the thing. This doctor that I went to, he did a lot of the boob jobs. And he talked about how he felt that there were certain doctors, at least this is 1994, so now 30 years, that they weren't doing it the right way. So he had ideas that were great ideas. He may not have been a great surgeon, but he knew what he was doing as far as you should cut here, not here. And he talked about the number of major bodybuilders of the 80s and 90s where the doctor who did their gyno surgery did not know what he was doing, that he was a regular surgeon who didn't specialize. So he talked about, and I don't know if you're a doctor, again, no names, when he did the boob job on women, he felt that they should be as close to contest shape as possible, that when the person was of normal weight, that they were going to look the best if that was the scenario. I don't know.
It'll change, I guess it'll change the aesthetic of the way it looks how much body fat you have.
Right.
But, I mean, I wasn't in my competition
Yeah, well, no, he didn't mean
point of my life yet.
Right. Okay,
when that
I guess he just meant that if you had a choice, that if somebody's normal walking around weight was 130 and they competed at for example, 115, and they could go as high as this, he wouldn't want you to be at like a max off-season, 16% body fat.
Yeah,
but
I was skinny as a rail then, so it didn't matter.
Okay, how long were you thinking about getting that surgery before you got it?
I mean, it was so long ago; it's hard to say, but we would go out and you're in the club scene, and I kid you not, like that, at that point, that's what everybody had. They did not have big butts. We were skinny.
Right. There was no such thing as a Brazilian butt lift.
It wasn't a thing.
It's past Generation X.
It was skinny with big boobs. So my girlfriends used to call me tits on a stick.
You know what's interesting? There's a movie, Beautiful Girls. It was a movie in the 90s with a very young Natalie Portman and Rosie O'Donnell and Uma Thurman, and I believe Timothy Hutton, among others. And there's a moment in the film where Rosie basically is explaining to the audience there are certain things that are not supposed to be possible with the human body. He said, and with her usual shrill, we know what guys want. They want a girl with big boobs and no waist. Just like, the baby got back. And she was, but what Rosie's character was saying, this standard is not a real thing.
Right.
And so, I mean, I hate to say it, it sounds like you were not pressured. Maybe that's the wrong word, but you didn't want to look.
I wanted that aesthetic.
I was
a young woman,
Right.
That's what old girls did back then. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty that do it now, but that was the aesthetic that we all strived for.
Right.
Super skinny with big boobs.
Yeah. Yeah. And from the guy's perspective, big arms with abs. That's it.
Right.
Don't care about anything else. And my
old leg day left and right.
Yeah. And listen, my old pal, my old buddy, Frank Seppi, I love the guy. I've known him since we were both in our early 20s, a little older than me, if I could say that out loud. But we've known each other so long, and in most cases, unless you have unusually good genetics, just crushing your arms, you'll get a little bit of growth, but it's not going to really do that much. Frank, in his book, which was called, I forgot the name of his book. Frank, I'm sorry. I forgot the name of your first book. But he talked about the fact that in his case, he did things backwards, but his body took to the weight training like flies to honey.
He still looks amazing.
And the guy is ridiculous. He's absolutely... And he lives it. He does hot yoga.
Yes.
He does a ton of stretching, a ton of core work. Like, he's not a paper champion type guy.
My
he's
good friend
deal.
just massaged him.
Okay. So he's even going for that kind of care, that he's going for deep tissue and everything like that. Yeah. Yeah, he trains a lot with Don Saladino.
And they posted it, so it's not like I'm sharing secrets. They posted it on their socials.
And he does workouts with the celebrity trainer Don Saladino. Don lived only a couple of minutes when I was in Huntington Village. He lives just outside, like near the Lloyd Harbor. It's a gorgeous place. But he was able to build a facility that he calls the Barn, which is like a separate, I think it's on his property, but I'm not sure. But it's a building that is a gym. And that's it. And they often train there. I see Frank in Huntington Village occasionally. He says, "Go, are you working with this?" Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. One thing, Frank shouted me out. He was appearing on another podcast, and they were talking about wrestlers who ended up being actors. So of course they started with The Rock, who has had an incredible career, and he's still in wrestling. And then they mentioned a couple of other people. Frank asked his co-host, what's your favorite, like, what's the best wrestler movie? What is the best overall movie starring a wrestler? And the guy kind of was stumped. And then Frank said this movie with the famous wrestler named Roddy Piper, who unfortunately has passed, a science fiction film called They Live, directed by John Carpenter, who also did the original Halloween. And Frank knew that I would get a kick out of that, and he went out of his way. He tagged me on the podcast, like, so that I would see it. And like he shouted me out for that reason, like tagging me on the thing, which I thought was great. So yeah, he's somebody who at the beginning, he didn't immediately start off, okay, I'm going to do legs, I'm going to do shoulders. He's just boom. And all of a sudden he's got 17-inch arms.
Yeah.
So, you know, most people, you can't just focus on one area and have it be dynamite.
Right.
You know, you gotta do better.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you have any other cosmetic surgery or?
I had my nose fixed. I was a flight attendant back in the day, and I couldn't breathe. It got to a point where I was constantly congested. I was constantly getting sinus infections. I went to see an ENT, and I'm like, something is going on. And the guy's like, I think you broke your nose. And I'm like, no, I never broke my nose. He goes, I think you did. And I'm like, wouldn't I know if I broke my nose?
I think so.
So I decided to move forward and get it fixed. And I'm like, while you're in there, can we pretty it up a little bit? And the surgery, like after the surgery, he's like, you broke your nose. I told you. And I'm like, well, I had no idea. I played soccer as a kid. Who the heck knows? Right. I got hit in the face with the ball. I got knocked out a couple of times on the field. So that was the next one. But there was a nose break at some point.
All right. So you had technically somewhat of a nose job. You had a boob job.
The septoplasty, rhinoplasty combo.
Did the doctor say that you had a deviated septum?
I did.
Okay.
Yes, I did.
All right. And my dad had that when he was a kid, and they didn't tell him, and he didn't go for any kind of surgery, but he, every once in a while, when he would be sick, he would sometimes sound almost robotic, like more nasally than you should when you're sick.
Yeah. And, there was one side of my nose was basically closed because the way the nose broke.
Oof.
So it was kind of pushed into.
So you took a shot without realizing it, or you were injured and didn't realize you were injured?
I had no idea.
So you don't even know when it may have happened?
No.
Damn.
I had my mom's nose, so I looked just like my mom. I had no idea it had been broken at some point, and
right.
Whatever.
Okay. Now, have you had to, as I said, begrudgingly, I've had to make a lot of adjustments to the way that I work out over the years to try to keep from serious injury, because I had a couple of very serious injuries. Have you had to make any major adjustments to your normal workouts? Because I mean, my memory of you is that you were never like deadlifting 350 or competing in power. So you weren't doing anything quote unquote crazy. I
don't go crazy with my lifts. I don't think I really ever did. Like, you always want to have some sort of a goal, but as I've gotten older, I'm much more smart about listening to my body.
Sure.
Because number one, I have a physical job, so I need to be able to go to work. I can't be doing lifts that put me out of whack, and then I can't lift my arm, or I need to be able to take care of patients all day long. So I think I'm just much smarter. If my back is hurting me, I either don't lift and I rest, or I do something that I know is not going to affect it. Or if my shoulder's really bad a particular day, I have to just be smart about. I think a lot of us, as we get older, you kind of just need to do that more.
Yeah. When I did I was telling her off the air, I did a podcast the other day, an episode in honor of Jack Lemmon, who was, it would have been his 99th birthday 2 days ago. And I mentioned how Jack Lemmon made a movie in the 80s with Julie Andrews, actually, and directed by Blake Edwards, who Lemmon had worked with in a movie about alcoholism in the 60s, was kind of a little bit groundbreaking, called Days of Wine and Roses. But the movie they did in the 80s is called That's Life. And it's kind of a comedy drama. And Lemmon plays a character who is turning 60. And he was about 60 at the time the movie was made. And he's not really that freaked out about the fact that he's turning 60, except for the fact that he has a whole host of problems that are maybe in his mind, or maybe they're not. His back hurts, his shoulder hurts, he has a constant slight headache, his feet hurt, his hands hurt, his arms hurt. He's not sleeping well, so he's got a whole laundry list. And he thinks that there is a medical problem or a series of medical problems, but the doctor says, Harv, you are 60.
You're fine, yeah. You're just getting older.
It is very difficult, and I've made my peace with the fact that there are certain things that I will not ever do again in the gym. I will never bench press 300 pounds again. It is theoretically possible for a person of my age and my structure to do it, but there is a percentage of injury chance. It's not worth it. And that's the thing that a lot of people, less women than men, in general, it's difficult to accept that, number one, you're not going to be a kid forever. And number two, you can't do this indefinitely. And that was the thing when I mentioned in the last time we spoke, the Disney Plus series with Chris Hemsworth called Limitless, where, he did so many different things. Each episode focused on some aspect of life extension, and not just life extension, but living longer, stronger kind of thing. And he even talks about it where he says, the goal is that I'll be able to do whatever I want exercise-wise for as long as possible, but obviously there's going to come a point where I will go in reverse.
You have to make changes, right.
And so the idea is you want to stay young, at the very least young at heart, and you want to be able to not be compromised by injury. And everything that you can do to avoid emergency surgery, avoid being laid up, avoid missing work, or heaven forbid, you're trying to get yourself ready to compete and you fuck up your knee or something terrible.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, think about the disappointment and the frustration on top of that. So it's like, err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
Even when you're in your 20s, it's okay to be cautious. And this, I saw a video with this Sam Sulek where he was doing some kind of bench press and he was using like a short range. He's so big, it might not be a short range. It might be his range of motion. But he felt something pop on his right pec. And where he put his hand, he wasn't screaming in pain, but where he put his hand, it's like, I think that might be a pec tear. You ought to see a doctor. And I assume that he went to see somebody. But you see that and you say, right there, he could have just tore his pec and he could have been out for months. And that's a young guy. That's a guy at the absolute apex of his health.
It happens.
Right.
Bicep tears. How many? Oh. Like every man at some point has at least one bicep tear.
Or something.
It's crazy.
Yep.
It is so common.
Yeah. Yeah. What was I going to ask you? Oh, so have you done anything different, like diet-wise this year, or in terms of your caffeine intake, or is your pre-workout and your general, like your basic day?
I have tried to, this is something we can get into at some point, that Netflix show where they take the sets of twins. This is a
nature versus nurture kind of thing.
They make one do a completely vegan diet and one sticks with like animal proteins, beef, chicken, poultry, whatever. I watched that not that long ago, and I had kind of been leaning towards, I need to go more anti-inflammatory, possibly less like animal proteins, meat. And after watching that show, I was like, all right, we're going to make a concerted effort to cut back the amount of meals each day that I'm eating chicken or beef or something along those lines.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean,
that's a big thing that I've changed.
Yeah. I don't really eat much red meat. I've also, in my diet,
I'm a carnivore. I love a good steak.
Right. And nobody should eat like me. I'm eating ice cream. I'm having nachos, but I it's so stupid, but I have the amount of time where I can do a lot of cardio and all that. So, but the general idea of
don't
eating
do
less,
this at home, kids.
Right. Don't do this at home, but eating less red meat in general, for me, is something that I do. I'm not opposed to it. It doesn't agree with me. So a lot of the stuff I do is not because I have any high-minded ideas, but simply because this doesn't agree with me. And if I have ground beef, I'm fine.
What works best for your body, and that's different for all of us, and people just need to be mindful.
And that's trial and error.
How they feel after
diet-wise, right. Don't try to put a square peg into a round hole.
Right.
All right. I'm going to wrap up this segment. All right. Okay. All right, so that was like diet focused, fitness. Okay, that's good. Let me just wait for this to recycle.
We never even we started on the girls that had issues, and then we got off track.
Yes, no, but we can jump back into that though. That's okay.
Perfect.
The only reason why I stopped it, I was about to hit 30 minutes.
Right.
You can only go 30 at a time. And okay. All right. So let's stay on that. I'm going to start recording, and I'm going to ask you about the surgical mishaps.
Okay.
All right. So I'll be able to edit that later. Okay. So we started to talk about, actually more than started, we talked about some of our own surgical experiences, and you had a difficult time recovering, but within normal parameters.
Oh, no, everything was, I was fine.
You didn't have massive complications out there.
No.
You could talk a little bit about some of the people you know who had disastrous or near disastrous experiences after surgery.
There are two girls, like I was talking about earlier, that I would not mention the doctor's name because he's very well known, but both of them, the long of the short of it is both of them wound up in the hospital because of infection, issues like that. And one of them, very, very serious infections, then on IV antibiotics and all these things. So it's just because somebody has a very, very popular, famous name does not mean that that's maybe the best person for the job.
Oh, absolutely. And as I said,
why are they advertising and why are they?
Yeah.
I don't know. And I'm in healthcare, so
right. Yeah, it's in my own experience, which was that I nearly bled to death. It was not an infection issue. It was simply that something got missed in the hour after the surgery where I was still under observation. See, the thing is, they don't send you home immediately.
No.
They want to make sure your signs are stable, all normal kind of stuff. But there were things that were missed in the initial hour to 2 hours as I woke up and got out of the anesthetic fog that I was in that weren't seen, where if somebody had been paying closer attention, they would have said, he's got a lot of bruising on the right side. This doesn't compute.
What's happening
It got
here?
missed.
There's something going on.
Right, it got missed. And it is unfortunate because we know that it's not an easy job being a cosmetic surgeon because it's so easy to get sued. But you're usually getting paid a lot of money to do a job a certain way, and nobody should nearly die of septic shock or die of infection or anything like that. So it is unfortunate that they ultimately made a full recovery.
Yes, they're both fine now. One of them is a competitor, which I will not name
either
of their names.
Of course.
But it could cause a lot of problems. My one close friend that had the issues with this particular provider, just two little kids. And I'm like, you can't be putting yourself in a situation where your kids are not going to have a mom.
Right. And that's the thing, is that often surgeons, because they want people to feel comfortable with them and trust them, they're not going to talk about that there is a risk anytime you cut into the human body. So what would be normally a quote unquote safe and simple surgery, it could be, because I know a lot of people that had the same surgery done that I did, the gyno surgery, that had no complications. They wore the pressure vest for 2 weeks and then they were fine and they had perfect healing. They had very little scarring. But there is a possibility you're not going to be able to raise your hand over your head for a year, or heaven forbid you end up in the hospital where they're worried about septic shock or some other kind of horrible thing. Because again, you don't want to end up in the hospital because you went too hard on the bench and you popped your pec, or you tore your tricep tendon or some other awful injury. And you certainly don't want to end up in the hospital when you've just spent $10,000 or $15,000 on elective surgery. Insult on top of injury on top of insult.
Do your research, know what you're getting yourself into. And like he said, surgery is surgery. If your body is being cut open, there is a slew of complications that can happen under normal circumstances. So burying your head in the sand does not happen.
In the words of Jack Nicholson in the movie Batman, you better be sure. You better be sure. Just make sure, as she said, to do your research and don't jump into cosmetic surgery lightly. Make sure that it's the right decision for you.